So from what I can tell online and from your website, it looks like skateboarding is quite a big part of your life. And I just saw you smile. So can you tell me a bit more about that? Because I think that's really cool.
It's just my favorite sport. Unfortunately, I haven't been skateboarding that much here in the Netherlands because I'm more like a downhill guy,
Yeah.
and there are no hills in here. It's a flat country.
Flat country.
Yeah, I'm thinking about buying an electric skateboard, but yeah, I love skateboarding. I have actually started skateboarding quite when not when I was a child, but after I think 21 when I started skateboarding because I had friends that used to skateboard and I started skateboarding with them.
Yeah.
It's just a passion of mine. I have two skateboards there. If you,
Oh, nice.
yeah, I
It's one
had
of those
four when I
there's a
lived in Brazil.
oh, that sucks. You had to pick your two favorite children. That must have been hard.
Actually, one of them actually both of them I sold to friends. So when
Oh,
I go
cool.
to Brazil, I can still use them.
That is a very clever idea. I think I might remember that. But what made you fall in love with skateboarding? What was the draw for that for you?
I think the freedom that it gives you, it's awesome, and it's nice because it's a sport that you can do with friends. But if your friends don't want to go skateboard with you, you can still do. If you can just go by yourself, right? So
Yeah,
it's it's all about the freedom and
that's
the
cool.
wind in your face when you were going downhill, and yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, I like that that thing you said about, you're not reliant on it being a team thing. Like if you can do it with other friends, you can, but otherwise it's not like a constraint from you actually being able to do it. So that's quite a cool way of looking at it. Um,
Yeah.
Cool. I've also prepared a few just like quick fire questions which you haven't been able to prepare for, but they are meant to be very easy and lighthearted, and really just to get a sense into a little bit into who you are as a person, Valmir. So I'm just going to go down the list. I haven't thought of a name for them yet, and I keep saying this every time I tell someone about them. But at the moment, they are short answers, no follow up questions. So I'm just going to ask the question. There's no follow up, and try not to think too hard. Just sort of say whatever comes to mind. So, your first question: after a really tiring day, how do you spend your evening?
Sleeping.
And what's a really good book that you've read recently?
A really good book. I have recently read Composing Software from Eric Elliott. He's a person that is really into JavaScript, and it's a really good book.
And tea or coffee?
Both.
How do you take them?
Without sugar.
And what is one invention or app that you wish existed but doesn't?
I have no idea how to answer that.
If I were you, just based on what you said, I would potentially say something that can make hills for you wherever you are, no matter, so you can skateboard anytime.
Simulator would be a
Hills.
really fun.
And what is something you are glad that you said no to recently, and why?
So one thing that I am proud of having said no to is that I have said no to some companies that are not willing to hire talents to work remotely.
And what is the thing that cost you less than 50 euros, but was the best investment most recently?
A good one was the Google Assistant.
Ooh, interesting. I haven't heard that one before. Very cool. Yeah, I mean those are the questions. Very quick, short, and sweet. So thanks for participating, and welcome to the OfferZen podcast. It's really nice to have you here, Valmir.
Really nice to be here as well, Jamiro. Thanks for inviting me.
So just briefly, I've obviously had the pleasure of talking to you before this, but for anyone who hasn't sort of heard about you or seen you online, could you just give a little bit of introduction into sort of your journey through software development, and how it started, I guess.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Walmyr. I'm originally from Brazil. I've been working with software development since 2004. My journey in software development started as an intern at HP, where I started working as a manual tester. And I didn't like programming at that time, actually. it was a good way to start in software development without knowing how to program. After some time, I got tired of doing manual stuff, and then I started learning to program to do things like test automation, and then I kind of got passionate about software development. Since then, I have been working with quality assurance and software testing and test automation and things like that. And now I'm in a move from software testing to software development. In 2014, I worked for a startup company where I started coding most of my time. And since then, I have been doing, like, coding has been more of my job than anything else. After that, I moved to Norway. I worked for whereby.com, which is a video conference service that runs in the web, in the browser. It's the former appear.in. Then I moved to the Netherlands after living there for almost 2 years. I currently live here in Amsterdam. I worked for GitLab for a bit more than 1 year as a software engineer in test. And currently I'm working part-time as a software developer for a company in Brazil, 100% remote.
Awesome. And what are some, because I think people may not know this, but you've done quite a few things up until now. You have quite a cool sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of like experiences, many different kinds of experiences with software development. It's not just coding. So could you just give some insight into what kind of things you've produced, and also what some of the stuff you're currently working on are?
Yeah, for sure. So some things that I have done apart from working, I have I love sharing knowledge, and the first thing that I have done to start sharing my knowledge was starting a blog post where I post content in Portuguese since I'm Brazilian. Um, After that, I started also a YouTube channel where I teach about test automation, also in Portuguese, unfortunately. And there are many topics more career related, not really technical. The channel and the blog are called Talking About Testing. And after that, I started also writing on Medium, then English content there about software testing and software development in general. I have an online school as well where I teach about test automation. The online school, on my online school, the courses are in Portuguese, but I have all the courses also available on Udemy, and then they are available in English. Apart from that, I have also wrote a book about a test framework called Protractor, and the book is available in both Portuguese and English.
And I'm interested to hear from someone who works with software development in a bilingual context. How do you think about like coding in Portuguese and English? Is that a difference for you, or is that something that has been a significant either learning curve or even like benefit to you?
I think the benefit is more in terms of the content that I create because I can achieve more people. But when I code, I still use plain English when describing things that I'm coding because it's more like a standard.
It's really interesting. And I think if anyone's thinking of learning Portuguese, they could maybe use your courses to get some new software development knowledge and language learning.
Yeah, I actually know a guy from Romania that learned about one of the frameworks that I teach by listening to my YouTube videos in Portuguese because Romanian has kind of it has something from a Latin language as well, and Romanians can understand Portuguese, but for people that speaks Portuguese, they can't understand Romanian. It's super interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I did linguistics at university, and I think that's a field that I would love to experiment and learn more in because there's many cool overlaps like that as well. And yeah, I mean, so German is one of my native languages, and I often see like with Dutch and Afrikaans and even some like Danish and Finnish languages, there's like very interesting overlaps and similarities. I'd love to have seen those things evolve in real time back in the day. Uh, but yeah, so as you mentioned, you have Udemy courses online at the moment, and one of the things you're currently working on and are very excited about is this testing framework called Cypress, or Cypress.io. So, just in super simple English, because I think Cyprus is not only a nice coastal country to work from remotely, but it's also a testing framework now. But in super simple English, without getting too technical, could you just give some intro to what Cypress.io is, and maybe focus first on like what kind of problems it solves? What is the main problem that it tries to solve?
Yeah, I would say that Cypress is a test automation framework or a test automation toolkit that can be used for all kinds of testing. They sell it as a test framework for end-to-end testing, but actually you can do many different kinds of testing, such as API testing, functional testing, um, visual regression testing. So you can even do unit testing with Cypress. And one of the most benefits that I see is that the learning curve to learn the tool is much lower than any other framework that I have ever seen.
Interesting. So I was going to ask whether that is unique to Cypress being able to do all those different tests. But as you just said, one of the differentiating factors there is that the learning curve is a lot lower with Cypress, which is interesting. So based on that, like, who would you say it's mainly built for or most useful for? Like, is it for every kind of developer, or what sort of niches does it fit into best?
Yeah, I would say that Cypress is a tool developed by developers for developers and for software engineers in test or quality engineers. It's it's like when you think about test frameworks, usually people relate like Selenium not to developers but to a quality team that does a bit of manual testing and a bit of test automation. But Cypress is more focused on developers, so it's super developer friendly, and it has, instead of installing all the tools that you need to do testing, it has everything packed in one tool, and you have basically everything that you need to start building your tests.
So is that when you said developer friendly, is that one of the things that makes it more developer friendly, or are there other things that makes it, as you said, developer friendly?
Yeah, so it's more developer friendly because it's it's easy to debug your tests. It's easy to watch your tests while you're changing your code, and the tests are rerun when you're changing the code and things like that that other tools don't offer you.
And what made you interested in this testing framework initially? Like, was there a moment where you first discovered it or became really excited about it?
Yeah, there was actually I heard a lot about Cypress before, and I have never tried. And one day I read a blog post with like a step by step on how to use it, and I decided to give it a try. And I found it awesome because it was like in a few minutes I was able to write a test from scratch. And if I would use a different tool, I would have to spend a lot more time. Then I tried in a real project. At that moment, Cypress was still in beta. Um, it worked for a while, and after a while we actually had to change because it had at that moment some limitations. uh, but the nice thing is that because the way you write tests with Cypress is very similar of the way you write tests with different frameworks, I could reuse many of the things that I have developed. I didn't need to throw it all away and build something new from scratch. I was able to reuse lots of the things that I created with Cypress actually.
And why were some of those things important or significant to you? Like, what is significant about Cypress, given those problems that it solves, and the way it solves those?
Yeah, I would say that one of the things that I try to do when I work as a quality engineer in a team is I like to say that quality is everyone's responsibility. It's not just the QA person or the quality department. It should be the responsibility of all the developers developing the product, for instance. And it's and Cypress makes it easy for developers to adopt using the tool. because it uses the same tools that developers are already used to when they are writing their any unit tests, for instance. It's easy to introduce Cypress to front-end developers that are really into JavaScript, because this is the language that Cypress uses. So Cypress helps you to not just be the person that writes the tests, but it helps the team to write the tests and to evolve the test framework all together.
So I think this is starting to touch on something which I wanted to dive into a little bit. So this is quite a cool segue. But given some of those things you've just mentioned as well, how does Cypress help you or help someone using it? But you can obviously talk from your experience with it. How does it help you on a day-to-day basis? So, like, what are some of the kinds of situations that you've used it for, or that someone might be able to use it for?
Yeah, so one of my favorite features of Cypress is that in many test frameworks, what they offer is that you can do everything through the graphical user interface. But with Cypress, you can do things not only through the graphical user interface, but you can also access the server, you can access the operating system. So, for instance, when you want to test, for example, a flow where you have to log in and you have to search for a product and put it in a cart and make a checkout, if you use something like Selenium, for instance, you would have to do all the steps through the graphical user interface, which would make your tests very slow and also not very reliable, because if something breaks in the beginning, you can't finish the process. But with Cypress, you have the opportunity, for instance, to skip all the steps that are just the pre-requirements for your test, doing it behind the scenes, for example, calling the server to create the state that you need in the application for them to just make the checkout, for instance. So this is one of my favorite features.
And why is that, or rather, what does that let you do? Like, why is that such a cool feature that you can speed up that process and that it is more reliable? What does that enable for a developer like yourself?
Yeah, so one thing you just said, it speeds up the test execution. And the other thing is that it makes your tests more reliable, because we know that doing everything through the graphical user interface, it sometimes might break your tests without the application being actually broken.
Right.
So you can have more reliable tests and also faster tests.
And are there some other use cases where you can think that that Cypress would help, or that some of Cypress's features can benefit software development?
Yeah, for sure. Well, there are other things that Cypress can do, like unit testing, for instance, React components or any other kind of components, where you can, then you wouldn't be doing end-to-end testing. You would be testing a specific component in isolation, but you can mock the other parts that this component depends on, and you can test it, just that component isolated from the rest of the application. And when you test all the components, then you can integrate all of them, and you know that they work well in isolation, and then you can test the whole flow end to end.
And I'm curious because you also said something earlier about it. I can't remember your exact phrasing, but you were saying that there's a team wide benefit to it, right? You're not just there's like I think you said something like quality is everyone's responsibility, right? So how does that tie in to these particular use cases? How does it help quality be everyone's responsibility?
Yeah, well, I would say it's especially because other test frameworks are known for being not very reliable, and developers they don't like writing tests because sometimes the tests are failing and actually there's nothing wrong with the application, and then they have to spend time fixing the tests that are providing them a false negative result, for instance. And with Cypress, you can have very reliable tests because you can test through the graphical user interface, for instance, just once what you need. And for other tests that need this as a precondition, you can skip that part through the graphical user interface and do it through HTTP request, for instance, right? And this helps. This is like more what developers would be looking for, I would say.
So something you said there, I think, is very interesting because I admittedly I haven't done a lot of coding, but I have started learning Ruby quite recently. And one of the things that you said resonated in that often when I'm trying to test a thing, the test is broken, but I'm like, but it looks fine, and I just skip it because I'm like frustrated. And as you said, it takes time. So I think if someone's listening and they don't necessarily have they're not very enthusiastic about testing frameworks because they've never seen the value in it or haven't been able to reap the rewards or the benefits of it. What would you say about Cypress that changed that for you, or that you think makes this different? And I think you've already touched on some of the things, but just from a perspective of maybe someone who's listening to this and doesn't really buy into testing, what benefits there are with good reliable testing.
Actually, I like this slogan of Cypress. They say that the web has evolved and finally testing has to. And when I read that at first, I thought it was just a nice slogan. But after using the framework myself, I realized that it was true because they solved many problems that other frameworks have never solved. And another thing that I pretty much like on Cypress is their documentation. It's super easy to consume. It has many different examples for you to try, and they have repositories that you can find real examples with real code. And in their documentation, it's not just a very good documentation, but it's also they teach you how to write tests the right way, and they teach you what is the wrong way and things that you have to avoid. So I watched the presentation from the CTO of Cypress a long time ago, or I think 1.5 years ago, where they mentioned that they used like 40% of the time of developing the product in building a very good documentation. So documentation is something that it's special and with Cypress, I would say, especially compared to other frameworks that I have used, like Selenium and Protractor and many others.
Right. I think that's as you said, that's a probably quite a big draw card in something like Cypress. And just from your personal experience with using Cypress, could you just give maybe some examples or situations you've been in with Cypress? And I think let me rephrase that rather. So given some of the benefits of Cypress, I don't think it comes without some of its own challenges and difficulties. So just from your experience with using Cypress, what have been some of those challenges that you've had to sort of work around, or what are some of the challenges that come with Cypress?
Yeah, well, one of them that comes to my mind is like they now have support for cross-browser testing, but if you need to test on Internet Explorer, it's not supported. So what they support is Chrome, Firefox, and Edge, and Electron, which is like the desktop version of Chrome. So if you need to test Internet Explorer, Cypress is not the right tool. Although I like to think that you can use Cypress for all the other things that you can test on Firefox and Chrome and have like just a small subset where you use a different framework. Some other challenges that Cypress comes with are like when you need to do what is called a cross-site scripting, where you need to actually from your domain access a different domain. For instance, when to log in an application, you need to go to Google to authenticate yourself. This is not possible with Cypress, but they have many different solutions where you can bypass this process. And actually they say in their documentation that Cypress not allowing you to do that is a good thing, because you can't, you should not test what you know, what you can't control. And since you are interacting with an application that is a third party that you don't control, if they change something, your test would break, and it's not your fault, right? So they have many different approaches for you to bypass this kind of situation, like making a request to the server that will redirect you to the page already logged in if you pass the right credentials, for instance. So there are different workarounds for you to bypass that. Another challenge that I have seen is well, two other actually that came to my mind now. One is that Cypress is just for testing one instance of the browser. So if you need, when I worked for Whereby, for instance, we had tests that we had to launch one browser, one Chrome in a Whereby room, and a Firefox in another room, and they should be sending streams of video and audio to each other. This is something that you can't do in Cypress. Another thing that's kind of challenging is like testing file uploads, which is very trivial to do with tools such as Selenium, but it's not that trivial to do with Cypress. But they also have like receipts on how to do that in a different way.
And what have been some of your approaches to those challenges? How have you thought about working around them? I don't know if you have any examples from stuff you've done in the past, but could you just talk through some of your thinking towards those challenges?
Yeah, I like to think that different tools solve different problems, and I don't. And many people will say that you should choose a test framework and use just that framework. I find it differently. I look at it differently. I think if Cypress is very good for all your functional testing, you should use that. You should use it for that, and have a subset, as I mentioned before, for something that Cypress doesn't cover, for instance. But but you could also use Selenium for everything, but then you would have all the challenges that Cypress has already solved for you. So I think you could have a big set of that end-to-end tasks using Cypress and a small subset using Selenium or something else, just for those specific things, for instance.
And why is that the case? Why do you think that you should have use many as opposed to one?
I'm not saying that you should have, because you might not have these kind of situations, right? You might not, like in the company that I work for example, we don't need to test on the Internet Explorer.
Right.
So it's not really a problem. Uh, but if you have these kind of situations, I think you can, the main point is that you can take advantage of all the easy to use tool of Cypress for the main part of your tasks, and for the parts that Cypress doesn't allow you to do, you can have a small subset which is still easy to maintain in a different framework, for instance.
Right, right, understand. So it's sort of like, as opposed to seeing the things that, or the challenges to Cypress as challenges, rather see them as places where you might be able to supplement other testing frameworks into that, so that you can reap the benefits of all. That's cool. And what are some of the things that you would say have been useful for you when considering whether or not to use Cypress.io? I think we've alluded to some of them already, but in other words, I guess, like, what sort of use cases does it serve and when does it not? Or are there maybe triggers that someone can use when, thinking, should I use Cypress or shouldn't I use Cypress?
Yeah. I like to, when I'm trying to decide a tool to use, my approach is doing proof of concepts. So I have a problem and I try to solve the same problem with 2 or 3 different tools, and I see which one fits best for the solution of my problem. So my suggestion would be doing something like that, because then you will really use the tool and discover the things that the problems that you might have using a specific tool or using a different one. Uh,
Do you have an example of a time when you've used different problems or used different solutions to a problem as a proof of concept, just to illustrate that point?
yeah, so one proof of concept that I have done with Cypress, and I have done with a different tool, like a protractor, for instance, was like I had to test a flow where I had to do many steps to reach to the point in the application where I had the exact state that I wanted to test. And for doing that with a different tool, I had to create many separate libraries myself. I had to build the libraries myself. I had to understand how the backend would work so that I could interact with that to create the state in the application, and then I would go to this specific framework like Protractor and do the part that I wanted. With Cypress, I can do everything on Cypress. I can execute commands like request or exec to execute things behind the scenes for me, and then I'm in the right state. So this was a good example where I was able to do the same thing a lot faster, a lot easier, and I achieved the same results, actually even better results, I would say.
That's cool. Yeah. I think that's some good advice there. So thanks for sharing. So we've touched on some of the use cases and challenges to Cypress, but if Cypress is something that someone is considering using, or as you just said, making a proof of concept with, or using to create a proof of concept, what are some good ways to get started with it? And what is your advice for someone who's looking at maybe starting with Cypress?
Yeah, I would say the first place to go is their documentation. As I mentioned, it's the best documentation I have ever read in terms of a test framework.
It's quite a compliment.
Yeah, and other tips that I can give as well is that you could even subscribe to my online courses on Udemy. I have 2 courses of Cypress. One is the basic course, and the other one is the intermediate course. So if you look for test automation with Cypress basic or intermediate on Udemy, you find my courses where I try to teach some of the things that I mentioned in here.
And is those are both in English as well here?
They are both in English and in Portuguese. So if you speak Portuguese, you can consume the one in Portuguese. If you speak English, it's there as well.
And just as a last point, what is one of the biggest lessons or insights you've learned about Cypress just in the time that you've sort of engaged with it and used it in your own software development and testing?
Yeah, it's kind of repeating what I have already said. I think the biggest thing that I see on Cypress is it's such an easy to learn test framework. So the learning curve is it's very short. And it's also a tool that has been evolving a lot. So when I first touched on Cypress was a bit more than 1.5 years ago. It was still beta. Now it has launched many different releases, many different versions. So they are constantly evolving,
Yeah.
and I think this is great. Another huge benefit is that they are also an open source project, so you don't need to pay to use. Of course, they have the paid version of their dashboard, but if you just want to use the tool, you can download it yourself. It's open source. You can even contribute to the project. I have even contributed to the project myself already.
And I think that touches quite nicely on something you said as well, which is that they seem to be um, one of the, well, Cypress seems to be one of the testing frameworks that is like evolving testing, and that is now sort of catching up, and feels more evolved than it has in the past, which I think is in and of itself quite an exciting thing to play with and be a part of.
Yeah, that's true.
So yeah, thanks so much for sharing all of that. And I think if anyone is keen to start or still has questions, that they can reach out to you. I will link your blog and YouTube channel and stuff in the description of this episode as well. So if they want to have a look and follow you online, they can. But otherwise,
Also my my website where they can find
yes.
All my contacts as well.
Cool. And I think your courses are on your website as well, so they can just check it out from there. Fantastic. Yes. So I'll add that as well. And otherwise, thanks so much for your time and sharing your experience with a cool new testing framework.
Thank you very much as well. It was nice chatting with you.